Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Lost Voice Radio program today. This is a special program in one sense because Mr. John Studi is out today. He may be calling in, but you have me solo today to talk about fatherhood. John is gone today because of fatherhood. We have an epic, seems like a Christmas snowstorm here in Minnesota, but it is Easter, in fact. But we're in the middle of a lot of snow, and so John has a snow day with his kids. So he may call in a little later today. So I apologize in advance. There will be no tomfoolery or skullduggery, no obligation of nonsense. We're just going to get into fatherhood today, to talk about fatherhood, the crisis of fatherhood, and this reaches not just to our family lives, but really it's pervading culture, obviously, but not just American culture, not just societal cultures, but it's really affected the culture of the church as well. And so I have a list of, or a stack of papers on my desk to highlight that, both in the church and out of the church. And one in particular that I would like to start with is from a guy I greatly admire, Mike Rowe. If you're not familiar with Mike Rowe, he hosted a show called Dirty Jobs. I don't remember what channel that was on, maybe Discovery Channel, something like that. But Mike Rowe hosted a show called Dirty Jobs, and the point of the show was to highlight all the dirty jobs in America, the jobs that people didn't want, the jobs that people kind of overlooked, whether it be garbage man. I remember one episode in particular, he took on the job of cleaning the inside of a concrete truck, which meant a lot of hearing protection and a jackhammer to clean out the inside of a concrete truck. But it was a great show, and he's a great advocate for people going to trade schools and just really kind of picking themselves up by their bootstraps and all that. And recently, actually just last week, he had a brief article regarding America's suffering because of an epidemic of fatherlessness. And so this is, I think, really getting to one of the core issues within our culture today is this idea of fatherlessness and how pervasive it really is. By the way, if you do want to call in today, feel free to call in at 844-801-6666, and the access code is 914121. So feel free to call in today. But Mike Rowe, I just want to read a little bit from this article. He says, a couple of years ago, when Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were getting divorced, Jolie was quoted as saying, "It never even crossed my mind that my son would need a father." Mike goes on to say that he was struck by her comment, and he remembers wondering how many other Americans might share her view. Moving to the first person, he says, "At the time, I didn't think many, but today I'm convinced the number is significant. I'm also amazed at how quickly fatherhood has fallen out of favor. Can you imagine a celebrity or anyone for that matter saying such a thing just 20 years ago? And I wouldn't even say that it's just fallen out of favor, but that quote, and if this quote is, or if this idea that, you know, somebody doesn't even realize a son would need a father is widespread, it's not that fatherhood has fallen out of favor, it's fallen out of people's consciousness. Fatherhood has simply been forgotten. Rowe then cites a number of facts and statistics to back up why this is such a problem. From the U.S. Department of Health and the census, 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. It's 5 times the average of American suicide rate. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. 90%, which is 32 times the average. 85% of all children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. 20 times the national average. And that's from the Center for Disease Control. 80% of rapists with anger problems come from fatherless homes, 14 times the national average. from a book or from a manual called Justice and Behavior. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, 9 times the average. That's from the National Principals Association report. 43% of U.S. children live without their father. It's from the U.S. Department of Census. Mike goes on to say, is it really so surprising to learn that a majority of bullies also come from fatherless homes, as do a majority of school shooters, as do a majority of older male shooters? Rowe goes on to ask readers to consider the possibility that this thing we like to call an epidemic of bullying is really an epidemic of fatherlessness. He goes on to say, I also think it's reasonable to conclude that our society is sending a message to men of all ages that is decidedly mixed. And he says, think about it. On the one hand, we're telling them to man up. Whenever the going gets tough, on the other, we're condemning a climate of toxic masculinity at every turn. If that strikes you as confusing, imagine being a 14-year-old boy with no father figure to help you make sense of it. And I've seen this. I've worked with youth for many years. I've worked with a variety of families and different family situations and all of that. I've been a teacher in middle school. I've worked with adults. I've really worked a lot with people at every stage of life. And what Mike Rowe is talking about is sadly extremely true, that there's such a mixed understanding of fatherhood, both of what it is and what the purpose of it is. And young people have no idea what to make sense of it, and so they rely then on things like the Washington Post. We're going to get back to Mike Rowe in a little bit, but I wanted to pull out this article I have from WAPO, which I think it's important to know kind of who pulls the strings, just so everybody knows. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon. And Jeff Bezos is decidedly, I wouldn't say liberal, progressive. And so it's I don't think any coincidence that the Washington Post, by and large, runs much more progressive pieces than anything conservative or right-wing. But the Washington Post here, when was this? 4/3. Or sorry, that's when I printed it. The article was on March 26th. It's 4/3 today, by the way. And it's by this man named Billy Doige Kilgore, which Kilgore's last name is already trigger warning. But anyway, he says, the title of the article is, I didn't understand male privilege until I became a stay-at-home dad. And before I even get into this, I think it's important to just have a little caveat or the asterisk that I don't think there's such a thing as male privilege, at least in the way that it's being represented today. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings of what it means to take on a masculine role or a feminine role. But the way this article is written, I think, supports my supposition here that male privilege as it's being presented is not something that exists. I think there are ways that males do have opportunities or benefits that females don't. I also think females enjoy opportunities and privileges that males don't. It goes both ways, and shockingly, it's because we're two different ways, two different flowerings of the human person. Male and female are decidedly different, and as a result, our experiences are going to be different. But anyway, this Billy Doige Kilgore talks about being a stay-at-home dad. He says, when my wife returned to work after a parental leave, I took my first trip to the grocery store with 2 kids, not knowing I would return home feeling like a hero. On a Monday morning, I pushed the green cart with flame decals through the second set of sliding doors and toward the deli. My 3-year-old son was strapped in the seat, and my 3-month-old son was wrapped against my chest. As a stay-at-home father strolling through the grocery, I felt conflicting emotions, love for caring for my sons and frustration with being an unemployed 37-year-old dad. By the way, this is the case for a lot of people. People love taking care of their children. People are also frustrated when they don't have work in their lives. But I think immediately this guy, Billy Doige Kilgore, is going against what he is trying to write against. He's trying to write against male privilege and men being on a pedestal over women for work that women do every day. But what he's equating here is that it's one thing to love and care for my sons, but, being a stay-at-home parent doesn't overcome having gainful employment outside the home. I, for one, can attest that the most difficult work is being a stay-at-home parent. My wife does an incredible job. I hope she's listening, because then she can high-five me or something when I get home. But in any case, being a stay-at-home parent is an incredibly difficult job, and I think it's the most difficult job. And so to say, well, I have frustration that I'm an unemployed 37-year-old dad, how about we have a little bit of admiration for those that stay home willingly, for those that actually stay home and their whole days are devoted to loving and caring for their sons and daughters. But anyway, I go on. At the deli, I exchanged pleasantries with a young woman behind the counter and ordered a pound of sliced turkey breast. I was immediately surrounded by a group of female employees. They leaned close to admire my infant son as he raised his bald head from the green cloth wrap. I never could get mine to like the wrap, one said. I bet you all have so much fun together, another said. You are the best dad ever, another said. And this is the part where I think this article already gets ridiculous. I'm not even done with the first page. But he says, I swelled with pride. Maybe they are right. Maybe I'm the best dad ever. See, the problem is not male privilege here. The problem is this one man's pride and arrogance. All parents generally have some kind of pride in caring for their kids, whether they're at home, they're at the grocery store, whatever. And yes, things get tough. And having that pride when you have a screaming child is tough to have, but the love never fades. You have times when you're more prideful than others, but it's in the care of your children and the love of your child rather than just the pride and admiration of yourself for your own abilities. The issue here is this man's pride. It is not some patrimony within the hierarchy of our society, male kind of privilege. This is his own fault, but he's blaming it on culture. He says, I soaked in the praise before tossing my sliced turkey into the cart and heading toward the produce. As I strolled, more comments came from fellow shoppers, and I absorbed them, giving little thought to the reason I merited heightened attention. The series of verbal high fives inflated my ego, and after receiving the receipt from the cashier, I smelled and pushed our flaming green cart through the sliding doors like a rock star walking off stage. I had no clue I was benefiting from male privilege. Or maybe people just love babies. I don't know. Maybe that's it. And his pride is, convincing him that it's a societal issue, not his own. This is just scapegoating society so that one doesn't have to work on themselves. He goes on to say, I enjoy the attention I receive as a stay-at-home dad. It is nice to have impressed eyes turned on me. My rationale for basking in the compliments is that I spend most of my time wading through dirty diapers, spit up, and spilled Cheerios. I deserve some praise, right? I thought so until one Sunday morning I sipped coffee and read an article about faux male feminists. The article included comments from Tal Peretz, a sociology professor at Auburn University, who described a concept called the pedestal effect. As I read, my male privilege became uncomfortably visible. Or, again, maybe it's one's conscience accusing you of being too prideful in your ability to be a dad. The pedestal effect refers to when men receive undeserved praise, attention, and rewards for performing work traditionally done by women, such as carrying a baby in a wrap. Also, I would like to point out, can't the pedestal effect be not simply for men? What if it's for anybody that receives undeserved praise? Man, woman, or in the case of our culture, anywhere in between. We could put anybody on a pedestal, whether they be male or female, or again, as our culture dictates, anywhere in between. But I digress, we only have male and female. He goes on to say, at the grocery store, I willingly stepped on the pedestal and used my privilege to gain attention for basic child care. And as I reflected on Peretz's words, other pedestal moments flashed in my mind. This realization was not something I could ignore. If you believe in gender equality, it is not hard to understand why it is problematic to place one gender on a pedestal for doing the bare minimum, while the other bears the bulk of the child care. Not only is it unfair, but it also does not serve the best interest of families and can place stress on them when parenting roles are unbalanced. For men who value gender equality and healthy families, assisting in lowering the pedestal is imperative. Okay, so a few things about this that I think really lends to Mike Rowe's assessment that there's a huge confusion among young people about whether or not fatherhood is good or evil. First of all, his last sentence there, for men who value gender equality and healthy families, assisting in lowering the pedestals is imperative. maybe we shouldn't lower the pedestal. Maybe we should lift up all members of our family that are doing noble work. And trust me, you can read John Paul II, you can read Benedict XVI, you can read many of the family-oriented documents the church has sent out, that taking care of children is an apostolate. It is a way for which parents to gain grace and enter heaven. Okay? So anybody taking care of their children deserves some kind of praise for the difficult work that it entails. And we don't take care of our children for the sake of praise. We take care of our children because we love them and we love our vocations and we want to do well in our vocations. But it's okay to receive praise and accolade for being a good parent. We need more good parents in this culture, and one way to foster good parenting is to recognize it when it happens, whether that parent is male or female. But the idea that men need to lower the pedestal, that is their own pedestal, I'm assuming, is a little bit on the ridiculous side, because simply lowering my own pedestal doesn't do anything for my wife. If I just lower the praise that's given to me because I'm doing well with my son out in public, that doesn't do any good for my wife in recognizing her. Rather, I should lift her up. It's not about lowering myself. It's about raising up the dignity of motherhood and femininity and all of this. So why should we lower the pedestal? And I think the irony here is that if the goal is to lower the pedestal, then wouldn't this mean that we're demeaning the role of women, that we have to lower ourselves to just the common work of women? No, I think it's a question of raising the pedestal for women, raising the good of motherhood, not just lowering the actions of a father out in public. And I think this actually then leads into the next issue, in that maybe this guy is getting the praise because we don't see fathers taking care of their children in public. It's not an admonition, or it's not something spoken against the mother in this case. If somebody comes up to him and says, wow, it's great you're wearing your baby, or wow, you're being a really good father today because you're out with your kids, how does that say anything against the mother? It doesn't. This is ridiculous. The problem is that there's so few fathers that are actually joyfully out in public with their children that when we see one, it's shocking and people recognize it. Okay? We do need more fathers out in public with their kids. This is a good thing for society. This isn't something to be ashamed of. Okay? This writer goes on to say, after reading Peretz's comments, I wrestled with how to respond and hopefully how to help other dads become more aware of this privilege. I reached out to him to discuss the pedestal effect, and he offered practical ways to counter male privilege. He reminded me of the complexity of privilege and how it operates on different levels: individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. We cannot dismantle institutions and structures by ourselves, but we can start with naming our privilege and giving credit to women where it is due. Again, this is a little bit frightening if the purpose of recognizing our privilege, or recognizing the pedestal effect, so to speak, is to dismantle institutions and structures. It says we cannot dismantle these things by ourselves, but we can start with naming our privilege and giving credit to women where it's due. The point of recognizing women and their good should not be to dismantle institutions and structures. If we dismantle all our institutions and structures, and that's just the goal, then society ends up in chaos. And guess who benefits then? The strongest and the fittest. Generally speaking, by way of physiology, these are men. Men tend to be bigger and larger and stronger than women. And so if we dismantle all of our societal constructs, women are going to be the ones that suffer. Children will be the ones that suffer. So this progressive mindset of dismantling institutions because there's some idea of male privilege woven within institutions and structures is ridiculous. It's not like male privilege is the rebar in concrete. If we pull it out, it's just going to crumble. No, we should work on honoring all of those in our workplaces, in our families, all of this. And part of this issue is that people have absolutely no idea what they mean by equality or gender equality. What they're really saying, or what they think they're saying, is that they want everybody to be exactly the same. If we're equal, we're all exactly the same. We have the exact same opportunities, the exact same experiences, the exact same everything down the line. And that kind of equality is never going to be attained because we all have different experiences. We all have different talents. We all have different abilities and upbringings and everything else. The beauty of the American dream is not that everybody has a chance to go to Harvard or that everybody has a chance to be CEO of some company, because not everybody has those talents. The beauty of the American dream is that we all have the opportunity to pursue our talents and make something of ourselves. That's something that should never be infringed, and in that way, the strict idea of equality is a fair one to hold. But to say that genders need to be equal is ridiculous, because the equality they're talking about is a mathematical equality. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 1 plus 3 equals 4. They're equal. Okay, mathematical equality is where everything needs to be absolutely and completely the same. What we should mean when we're talking about this is a equality of proportion. That is, that if we have an Nalgene bottle and a Dixie cup and they're both full, we can say they are equally full. Not because they have the same amount of milliliters, but because the canisters are full. You can't fit any more in there. And so the equality of proportion among genders is that we give the opportunities and the praise and everything else to the individuals based upon their individual abilities and merits and everything else. And so this equality of proportion is extremely important because we need to respect the differences between male and female. And that, yes, men tend to be stronger than women physically, okay? Women have other incredible abilities and values that men don't have. And so we need to respect this. But to say they're exactly the same is demeaning to both. If we say that we want all women to get the same accolade and same praise as men for doing the exact same job, then we're going to end up offending one or the other. Okay? We should offer praise simply because of the person doing it and doing the job well, not because it's in comparison to something else. We can't get into comparative praise because we're always going to offend and we're always going to have a trigger for somebody to get upset. And so praise ought to be given for the sake of the act itself, not because somebody is simply female when they did a male job or male when they did a female job. Why can't we just give praise when praise is due for the job being done? That's why this article from the Washington Post is so ridiculous, because it's talking about we shouldn't give praise to dads for doing feminine work of taking care of children. Well, isn't this guy exposing his bias of cultural roles and that kind of culturally formed roles for masculine and femininity? Who says that it's only women that can take care of children? Isn't that a societal construct to a progressive? I mean, this is ridiculous. And this is part of the reason why Mike Rowe, I think, was so upset about the loss of fatherhood in our culture and how confusing it is, because in the same article, we have this guy talking about how it's good to be a dad and it's great to be a stay-at-home parent and I love being a dad, but I can't receive any praise for taking care of my kids. Well, how confusing is that? It's absolutely ridiculous. And when I'm working with young people, they need to know their fathers. They need to know the role and the unique role that fathers play in their lives. It's very telling, the statistics going back to Mike Rowe, that these things are specifically from fatherless homes. 85% of all children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. Okay, so that means there's 15% of children who have behavior disorders that don't come from fatherless homes. That means that they either have two parents or they have no mother. Okay, and we can go down the line and assess it the same way. 90% of all homeless or runaway children are from fatherless homes. That means 10% of those who run away run away from either a two-parent home or a motherless home. All right, fathers play an incredible role in the formation of their children, and when fathers are absent, children start to lose the understanding of boundaries. And it's not that moms can't do it, it's that dads have a particular ability as masculine beings to establish boundaries in such a way that really outlines for children proper behavior. And that leads into, I really want to be clear here, mothers and fathers need to do this as partners, but dads have a specific role here to play. And to pretend that they don't is ignoring the statistics. It's ignoring the facts. Okay? So mothers and fathers have an equal role to play in terms of proportion, not in terms of mathematics. Okay? A father has a different way of disciplining than a mother. That's just the facts. Okay? When a child falls down, most of the time they run to mommy for comfort, right? When a child's in trouble, they, generally speaking, run away from dad and go to mom. And why is this? I'll let you guys all think about your own families with that one. Okay? But dads play a specific and important role here. And this is the case not just in our family structures. This is the case in the church as well. And so I had the two articles on fatherhood there. I have a whole pile of stuff here on things going on in the church right now that, quite frankly, shows a different kind of crisis of fatherhood that we need to really look at. By the way, if you want to call in and talk about fatherhood, talk about motherhood and their differing roles or specific roles, please feel free to call in today. John is missing. He's out in the world somewhere, playing in the snow probably with his kids. The dial-in number is 844-801-6666, and they'll ask you for an access code of 914121. Okay, so feel free to call in today. In any case, in the church right now, a few things I would like to highlight. We have some issues. We have issues because there's a crisis of fatherhood, spiritual fatherhood. Where do I start? I think I'll save this one for last. Let's journey down to the Diocese of Lafayette in Louisiana. I have nothing to lose. It's St. Mary Magdalene Church in Abbeville, Louisiana. Okay. On their youth group's Facebook page, they have this video of their youth doing a skit under the guise of Life Teen. And I've worked with Life Teen before. They have a lot of great material, but like all programs, it certainly gets abused. I think this is absolutely the case. On their Facebook page, they have the youth group doing a skit in the middle of the sanctuary, and it looks like it's probably post-communion. It looks like it's after the reception of Holy Communion, because it looks like there are altar servers off to the left of the video. I don't know if it's for sure during Mass, though, so I won't actually allege that it is. It just kind of seems like it's probably something going on there. But in any case, they're doing a skit in the middle of the sanctuary between the high altar and the low altar, with music blasting through the church. And I think, how is this appropriate? How can anybody look at this and say this is appropriate? The sanctuary, the holy place, is for the holy sacrifice. If you want to do the skit in the youth room, in the basement of the church, if you want to do it out in front of the church, whatever else like that, fine, great. But don't desecrate the area where the eternal sacrifice of the Lord is being offered on behalf for our sins. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I don't know who the priest is down there. I don't really care, because I'm not here to indict individual priests. But at the same time, to approve this and say this is okay, and, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the youth minister went rogue and just did this because, I worked in youth ministry for a while. Sometimes youth ministers just go rogue because of things and stuff. I've been there. Never to do things like this, but, I understand why youth ministers sometimes do the things they do. So perhaps Father was in the dark, and I'll just assume that. Assume the best of them. But in any case, This is a gross negligence on the part of the youth minister, and I say negligence because I would rather assume that there's some kind of negligence or ignorance rather than malice. But to reduce the sanctuary of a holy place, and this was a beautiful sanctuary too, to reduce this to something as vain and venal as a skit set to music is A, ridiculous, but B, it also undermines the faith of these young people. It's communicating to them, not that there isn't good in the skit, but it's communicating to them that there isn't really such thing as a sacred place. You can do kind of whatever you want, wherever you want, and as long as it's about Jesus, you can do whatever you want in the church. And this really strengthens the position that so many people have of individual conscience rights when it comes to morality. That as long as I see it as good, or as long as it has something to do with God, then it must be fine. A number of years ago, I did a mission trip out to Ukraine and Latvia. And it was a spiritual mission trip. It wasn't building houses. It was trying to evangelize and teach the faith. And one of the things I came across was that in both of these countries, they suffered from a very similar plague, and that was the fact that they were under communism for many decades. And under communism, they were not allowed any kind of spiritual practice that was not approved of by the state. So this means that the Catholic Church was outlawed. It meant that a lot of Christianity was outlawed. And so when the Berlin Wall fell, what happened was a lot of these people started just doing anything spiritual. They thought, well, as long as it's spiritual, it's good. And so you had people going to adoration and playing with Ouija boards. You had people buying into horoscopes and then doing novenas and just all this intermingling. And there was a great amount of spiritual warfare. And one of the reasons why I bring this up is because with this idea of a personal conscience being the final arbiter of morality is that, well, as long as I deem it good, then it's fine. The problem is that we see after the fact, and usually it's only after the fact if we're in the middle of it, that this attitude and doing this kind of thing is supremely detrimental to our souls. It's supremely detrimental not just to our souls in terms of salvation, but it's detrimental to our souls in terms of the formation of our intellect. And it creeps into the way we treat other sacred things in our culture. It creeps into how we treat the human person. It creeps into how we treat sacred spaces and places or common places. And it seeps into all of it because we are integrated beings. We're body and soul. And so what happens in one area affects another area. Okay, so that's down in Lafayette, Louisiana. This other one is down in, I think this is Brazil, the Archdiocese of Sorocaba. And this particular gem is a host in the monstrance being processed into the church, not by the priest. The priest is at the altar. Actually, it's being processed in not by any human. It's being processed in by a drone. So some genius attached a monstrance to a drone and flew it into the priest at the sanctuary. And all the while, everybody in the congregation is laughing and clapping and, oh, isn't this great? Ah, ha, ha, ha. And you have the drone pilot walking behind, and you have an assistant kind of holding on to the drone so that it doesn't, go wayward or whatever. What's with the gimmicks? We don't need gimmicks. We don't need triviality. We don't need this kind of stuff. What we need is the truth. And regardless of the kind of father that you are, whether it's a spiritual father as a priest, or it's a physical father as somebody who begets children, we don't need fathers to entertain. We do not need fathers to simply be our friends. We need fathers to help us understand the boundaries of the time and the place that we're in. We need fathers to help us understand the boundaries of what it means to be human and to be a spiritual being. This is absolutely ridiculous. This priest should be absolutely admonished for this. And the bishop should have a serious talk with his priest. Okay. This one is it's just particularly angry. And I bring these three cases up not just to, get people riled up. I don't want to just be, the angry Catholic here. But I think it's important that we know what's going on, because we have an obligation as Christians, as Catholics, to fight against our culture, and to establish good norms, because we're not here just to fight. We're here to actually profess what's true, good, and beautiful. And in order to profess what's true, good, and beautiful, sometimes we need to be aware of the ugly. Here is the ugly. The superhero vigil at a parish in the Diocese of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Right? If you feel like calling this parish and offering your anger, offering your frustration, please feel free. Again, I'm not encouraging people to get too militant about it, but again, I think, in this case, the priest definitely knows what's going on, because this is happening during Mass, during their family Mass. And this is just sacrilegious in every respect. But it's in the Diocese of Scranton, and it's called the Superhero Vigil. And I think it was actually at their family Mass, which was Easter Sunday, not the vigil of Easter. And this is further evidenced by, it looks like there's light outside the stained glass windows. But this all started on Ash Wednesday, when a bunch of, let's just call them grown children, some people might call them adults, showed up at Mass in superhero outfits. So we have, a woman in a Wonder Woman outfit in church, which by itself is certainly not appropriate for Mass. Not just that it's a superhero costume, but if somebody was wearing like a halter top and a mini skirt to Mass, I think there would probably be some issues with that, let's just say. But then it's also a superhero costume, which makes it so much worse. And there's Batman, and there's Superman, and there's all these superheroes. And so on Ash Wednesday, they gave a little talk to the kids about how they lost their superpowers. And in order to gain their superpowers back, the kids had to go through Lent and do good works. And first of all, this is absolutely ridiculous, because it's tricking children into doing good things. And beyond that, it just makes the faith seem like nothing more than a comic book or superstition. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, they tricked these poor kids into thinking that, they're not doing these good works for God. They're doing them for these fake superheroes to get superpowers back. And so then gets to the end of Lent, gets to Easter Sunday, and these superheroes show up again claiming they have their superpowers back. And there's a big banner in the back of the church that says, "Sometimes superheroes don't wear capes." I'm assuming that means that people should act heroic on their way out of church after Easter. But in order to act heroic, we need to have, the tools and resources in order to help us be heroic. That means grace as a Christian. And when we sacrilege the Mass like this, we are certainly not being open to grace, it seems. But, these people are parading through the sanctuary and up to the crucifix and everything else. It's absolutely disgusting. And, I have worked with kids for a long time, young adults, children, high schoolers, you name it. I've worked with them. And there's nothing worse, especially for a teenager, and younger, but especially for a teenager, to see somebody make banal what is sacred. There's nothing worse than an adult parading around in a superhero costume to try and convince somebody to believe in God. That's absolutely ridiculous. The thing that kids want most today is authenticity. Kids, whether they be 6, 7, 8, 15, 16, 17, or in their 20s, whatever, young adults, young children, they want authenticity. They can tell when you're not being authentic. They can tell when you're just trying to sell. Because this generation, more than any other generation, is being sold to constantly. They're being sold to on Facebook. They're being sold to on Twitter. They're being sold to in their schools. They're being sold to everywhere they go. The one place they don't need something sold to them is at church. What they need at church is the authentic message of the goodness of the human person, our fallen nature, which, if you are at an Easter Vigil, good for you. It's a beautiful thing. But one of the most beautiful parts, my favorite, is the Exultet, which is the beautiful hymn or chanted at the beginning of Mass. And it says, "O necessary sin of Adam, O happy fault, who gained us so great a Savior." Okay? So what young people need is the authentic teaching of the church, which talks about the goodness of the human person, the authentic teaching of the church about the fact that we are fallen, and the authentic teaching of the church about the reality of our need of Jesus Christ to be redeemed from our sins so that we might avoid hell and go to heaven. Okay? That means that we need to understand that there is a hell and that there is a heaven, that sin is real, and it's ultimately our choice because, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, the only thing necessary for a soul to attain heaven is to will it. All we have to do is choose heaven and we'll be there. Okay? It's not as easy as that because we can't just say, well, I want heaven and just go do whatever we want. If we're choosing heaven, that means we're conforming our lives to Christ, not a fake superhero at some really sad Easter Mass. And so this is absolutely an affront to all things Catholic, and it's a total failure in fatherhood. But that being said, I would like to highlight a couple good things in the church. Okay? So, just give me 1 second here to pull it up. There are a couple of good bishops out there doing some good things. And I want to highlight that as well because, again, it's not enough to just highlight the bad things because then people just avoid bad. We need to look at good things as well and highlight good things and applaud good things, just like I was talking about with seeing fathers in public with their kids and happy. We should applaud that. We shouldn't just shame them for being dads and not moms. We should applaud moms being in public for being in public with their kids and enjoying their kids in public because we should enjoy the fact that mothers are mothers and they beget children and raise children, and this is good for society. Okay, so we should encourage good things too, because when we encourage good things, it encourages others to do more good things. And so with that, we have this bishop here from Bishop of Fort Worth, Most Reverend Michael Olson. All right, and EWTN News and Catholic News Agency writes this: at the Chrism Mass celebrated during Holy Week, a Texas bishop offered reflections on the Church's liturgical life, telling priests straying from liturgical texts can be detrimental to the unity of Catholicism. Can you imagine if this bishop saw the superhero Mass? I'm pretty sure that strays from liturgical text. Not, positive? Well, you're right. I am positive. He goes on to say, the importance of Christ-centered and shared repetition in our collaborative mission as the Church requires that we avoid the addition of words or gestures, like superheroes, that are alien to the rites and liturgical texts provided us by the Church. Even though such liturgical abuses might at first glance appear to begin as good-willed efforts to avoid redundancy, superheroes, and tedium for people with attention spans made numb by contemporary modes of communication, superheroes, such efforts remain destructive because they take us away from the repetition that bears fruit in Catholic unity. So here we have attention spans made numb by contemporary modes of communication, a constant desire to be entertained, let's say, and the liturgical abuses might seem like they're goodwill efforts to avoid that kind of thing. Okay, in the case of the superhero Mass, the error is also the apparent medicine. Okay, it goes on to say, Olson described the difference between redundancy and repetition, saying redundancy can enslave us, repetition can liberate us. Redundancy, Olson said, is the practice of doing the same thing over and over again with the expectation of a different outcome. On the other hand, he said that repetition fosters the formation of character and develops our incorporation into the mystery of God. I would also point out that his definition of redundancy is what's been attributed to Einstein as the definition of insanity, to do the same thing over and over again with the expectation of a different result. So if we marry those two things together, redundancy is also insanity. And so to go against liturgical texts and do whatever we want in a redundant way to try and overcome the difficulties of our time is also insane. Okay, well, it's definitely insane also for the fact that we're going against the will of God that the church has put out there in terms of how he wants us to worship him. Okay. So this bishop goes on and on and on about the necessity of good worship, and it's true. And bishops are primary teachers of the faith. They're the chief teachers of the faith in our diocese. Priests need to safeguard the good of the liturgy and the beauty of it. There's another bishop here who goes on to talk about how we need to be in a good state of soul in order to receive communion. Most Reverend Mark Davies from the Diocese of Shrewsbury, which is in the United Kingdom. Bishop Davies says, don't receive communion if your lifestyle contradicts the gospel. Bishop Davies said that mortal sin or a lifestyle in contradiction with our Christian calling must be confessed and repented before receiving the Eucharist. This should be obvious to us. This is basic church teaching, and it has always been the same teaching. This has never changed. Notice that he doesn't say if you've sinned, you can't receive communion. It's that if you have mortal sin on your soul or a lifestyle in contradiction with our Christian calling, then we need to confess and repent before receiving the Eucharist. It's safeguarding not just the good of the Eucharist, but it's safeguarding the good of our own souls. St. Paul talks about this. If we receive the body and the blood unworthily, that is, lightly or without taking into account our sinfulness and repenting of it, then we drink the condemnation of the Lord upon ourselves. The good bishop of Shrewsbury is not simply making people feel bad for being sinners. He's actually trying to help people avoid furthering their own sin. And if you have the eyes to see, you can see that this is actually a very merciful thing that he's doing to help people be aware. So there's very good things from those two bishops. Also, there's a bishop recently, and I think Studi and I talked about it once before. I just want to get the name right. So if you give me a minute, and I wish I had some elevator music here, but I don't. So let me just pull this up quick. I just want to get the name and the place right. In the faith, which we're in great need of because there's other bishops who are going completely off the rails. It's Bishop Thomas Paprocki from Springfield has barred Senator Dick Durbin from receiving communion. Why? Because Senator Dick Durbin has supported Planned Parenthood and abortion repeatedly throughout his tenure as senator and before that. And most recently, he voted against the Pain-Capable Child Protection Act, which would have banned abortion, I think, prior to 20 weeks, or it might have been even a little bit earlier. Now, children in the womb can feel pain earlier than 20 weeks still, but it was at least something, and he voted against it because apparently you are okay with being a human who wants to see children suffer in the womb. It's ridiculous, but finally a bishop stood up and defended the Holy Eucharist, and also in this pronouncement, as a good father, he said this is not meant to be a punishment, it's meant to be an awakening to Senator Durbin to realize the error of his ways, and that's exactly what this is meant to be. It's not saying Dick Durbin can never receive communion, it's saying that he needs to amend his ways before he does, because we as fathers should be protecting children, not allowing them to suffer in the womb. And so, or at any time for that matter, but in this case in the womb. And so we have these bishops who are doing good things and are saying good things. And I have another story, and we don't have a whole lot of time left, but Cardinal Sarah from Africa, I think it was maybe a year or two ago, had talked about how priests should be saying Mass ad Orientem. We should all be facing the Lord, and he was very strong in what he was saying with this. And, of course, he was denounced for that, but he's absolutely right. We should be facing the Lord as much as possible. But we have these bishops and priests who are defending the faith. They're being good spiritual fathers. I can think of a few good ones to read out there. Monsignor Pope is good. Father Dwight Longenecker is a wonderful writer, as is Father Zulsdorf. And there's some other wonderful ones as well. But Father George Rutler, too, is a wonderful writer. So if you're looking for some good reading or guidance in that matter, those priests are wonderful. But ultimately what this is all getting at is that when fathers don't step up and set the proper boundaries, chaos happens. And we see this in those parishes I mentioned, whether it be down in Louisiana or Brazil or Scranton, Pennsylvania, when spiritual fathers don't step up and defend what is true, good, and beautiful, chaos ensues and sacrilege happens, and people get led astray. Because if you've ever read a book called The Soul of the Apostolate by Father Chautard, he talks about how really a parish can only be as holy as the priest leading it. And so if a priest is going to allow sacrilege in his parish and sacrilege in his mass, then people are not going to get it. They're not going to actually assent to the higher truths. And for this reason, priests need our prayers now more than ever, because they're being assaulted constantly, whether it be by our culture or by the demonic culture, culture of demons. So we need to pray for our priests, because they are responsible for so many souls. And if we really consider that a parish as a whole can only be as holy as a priest leading it, that's a tall order for any priest. Now, again, that's not to say that an individual can't be extremely holy in the midst of a kooky church, but we're talking about the church culture as a whole. So we need to pray for our priests, and when a priest does something particularly good, we should praise them, and we should make known that we are pleased with whatever that is. The church is not a democracy, but trust me, as a church employee, I see it from the inside. We generally only hear when bad things happen. It's pretty rare that somebody goes out of their way to compliment a priest or a church employee for something good. But boy, do we hear it when somebody is not happy with something we've said or done, regardless of whether or not it's the authentic teaching of the church. And so we need to praise our priests when they do good things, and we need to aid them with our prayers. But we also need to make known our desire for fatherhood. Fatherhood is so important. If we were to take these statistics that Mike Rowe gave and translate it into spiritual terms, 63% of youth suicides from fatherless homes. Okay, if a priest isn't going to be a strong father, then how many people are going to leave the church? Maybe 63%. I don't know. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. Okay, if we go down this list again, how many of these things can apply to the life of a parish? When a priest isn't being the father, isn't teaching the faith, people are going to doubt the faith. But it's not all on the priest. It's on the fathers in our culture as well. There's many statistics out there about the relation of a life of faith with how involved a father is in their children's life of faith. And so there was some crazy statistic like 70 or 80% of kids, if a dad merely helps them get dressed for mass in the morning, they're like 70 or 80% more likely to stay following the church. I mean, it's just these little things where fathers need to just get their hands dirty, sometimes literally by changing diapers, but they need to get their hands dirty and step up and actually start being involved in their kids' lives. And I'm certainly not perfect at this. I certainly need to pray with my little boy more. Fortunately, with a 7.5-month-old, and I'm still learning how to be a good father. I have a little bit of time and room to do better, but it's something that I'm constantly aware of how much my son's faith is guided and dependent on me as a dad to help him know the truth and to love the truth and to live it out. And so we need to really be mindful of the role of fathers and encourage fathers, and then to be aware of these straw man arguments or false narratives like this one from the Washington Post. And it's not that he doesn't have a point that we need to be mindful of the good that mothers offer. We do need that, and I think that's his ultimate goal, is to say women deserve praise at least as much as men, if not more, for their role in childcare. And I think, seeing what my wife goes through with obviously carrying a baby, growing a baby, birthing a baby, nursing a baby, I'm very glad I'm a man. I wouldn't want to do any of that. But at the same time, I offer things that she can't or would struggle with. And so that's what we call a partnership or complementary. But, I will forever praise my wife's ability to nurture and grow and bear a child and then feed it, and nurture it and help it grow and everything else. In part because I can't do it, but in part because I'm truly in awe of what that means to be a woman and feminine and a mother. And it's incredible. But we shouldn't look at fatherhood and motherhood as a competition. It's not like there's 100 units of praise, and if one parent gets 70 units of that praise, then the other parent is somehow shortchanged. We should honor and love parents for the sake of them being parents. We should love and honor and praise parents when they do good, and we should help parents in our lives, whether they be our friends or our own parents or whatever, understand the role of parenthood all the more by our own examples. One of the other things I had thought about when I was going through this Washington Post article is I don't generally wear our baby out. I don't think I've worn him once while we were out. I've worn him at home. But even if my wife and I go to the store and somebody sees the baby or she's wearing the baby, people still talk about how beautiful that baby is. Doesn't matter who's holding them. And that was one of the things in this article that the guy's like, well, they only came up to me and told me how beautiful the baby is because I was wearing them. I think that's pretty self-centered to think that's the case. I think people just really love little babies. They're adorable, they're cute, they're signs of hope in a sad and dark culture. But ultimately, I guess the point of this very long monologue today, since Studi is gone, is that mothers and fathers both deserve a lot of praise for the hard and arduous work it is to grow a life and nurture it, for both the sets of gifts that mothers and fathers offer. And I don't think anything much more than that needs to be said, or it could be said. But, I have 3 minutes to fill, so why not try and say a few more things? Oh, I don't want to leave anybody without hope, though. So I guess what I would say is this. Find a father today, find a mother today, and thank them for the work that they do, because we live in a culture that has a particular crisis of fatherhood. If we look at even within different cultures, I know the crisis of fatherhood is greater in, say, inner cities. It's greater in black cultures. It's even greater in Latino cultures than it is white cultures. But I'd say that white cultures really struggle with dads being absent from their kids, even though they're physically present. That being said, let's help fathers understand what it means to be fathers. And so if you are a father, don't be shy to take your kids out in public to be an example of what it means to be a joyful, loving father. If you're a mother, gently help your husbands understand what the children need from their father. Because even for me, as somebody who has 2 master's degrees, I'm one class shy, I have a second master's degree, but I have basically 2 master's degrees. I have a decade and some change worth of experience and all of that. It's confusing to go out there and try and understand what it means to be a father with every single message out there. Nobody's immune from it. We can't be immune from our culture completely. And so it is confusing, and it is difficult. And so mothers, we need your guidance. Wives, we need your guidance, because you are absolutely more in tune with children, your children and their needs than fathers are, in part because, generally speaking, we're out of the home more. But help us understand what the child needs and how we can support and fulfill that need, because it's so important. And so really the key to good fatherhood is good marriages and communicative marriages. But never waste an opportunity to be with your children and your spouse. And if you have things in the way, maybe TV, maybe computers, whatever, get them out of the way and have good family time, especially during this Holy Week. With that, hopefully there's a few chunks of wisdom in there for you today, a few chunks of hope. But please feel free to email in your emails of praise or admonition, either way. And again, that email is lostvoice@wcatradio.com. My name is Jacob Nelson, signing off for both myself and Mr. John Studi, who sends his regards. You'll have a blessed week in the Lord during this Holy Week, and we will see you next Tuesday. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.